Again, this is the first of 3 such miracles that are recorded in the Gospels where Jesus literally raised someone from the dead. So most regard these miracles as the greatest revelation of the power of Christ. To me, they all foreshadow the end times. We're all going to be raised from the dead or in the rapture, but the new body's coming. Thank you, because this one's starting to get sore and stiff. But either way, so most would say these are the greatest revelation of his power because he conquered even death. So each of them reveals his power at a different stage. I don't want to lose that in the introduction here, so I'm kind of addressing all 3 of these next 3 lessons at the same time. But they're kind of progressive. The one today, this is the resurrection of someone who has just died. They died within a few moments of when Christ arrived on the scene. In the next one, we're going to be looking at a restoration of someone who's being carried out for burial. They've died. They've already prepared them. They in a coffin, so to speak, and they're bringing them to the grave to bury them when they're risen. And then the third one, we're actually going to see someone who's been dead. They were dead for 4 days. Everybody knows what I'm talking about with that one, right? That's going to be Lazarus. We're going to look at it at the end. And he was already in the grave. So we'll see it progressively. I think there's some importance to realize there too. Each is like a step. He has power over death from a few moments ago to death over you've been dead for hundreds of years lying in the grave waiting for his return, and you're going to be resurrected. So we see it all the way through. So each subsequent scenario of these all 3 lessons in a row becomes more difficult. Again, I'm going to use that word difficult from our perspective, from God's perspective, and they're all the same. Nothing's more difficult than anything else. He just says it, and that's what it is. There's no difficulty on his part. But in our view, we see the progressiveness of it. Each one presents a situation where death appeared to have a tighter grip on the victim. Each one leading and preparing those who were sensitive to what Christ was doing to the day that he himself would conquer death, hell, and the grave, the resurrection of Christ, which, of course, we just studied that on Easter Sunday not too long ago. What an awesome time that must have been to witness Jesus assert his authority and his power over death. I'd be awestruck to be able to witness that. You do know even in today's world that happens. There's people who have seen people raised from death. I have not personally seen that, but I've read a bunch of accounts of it, even in modern times. So we need to see that death has no power over our Lord, nor does it have any power over those who are his. No power over Christ, but if Christ is in you, it has no power over you. All right, so we don't lose sight of that. That's an important thing. A lot of people are scared half to death of all that can happen, what might happen, what could happen. You don't have to be scared of any of that. I mean, I came to the point when I finally realized if I die, I'm going into the presence of Christ. So I'm not worried about that no more. I used to, as a younger kid, kind of worry about that, but now I'm like, I go driving down. Look, I'll drive on Highway 90. That'll scare most people half to death. I'm not worried about it, all right? Y'all know what I'm talking about. This miraculous, progressive work over death, in this 3 lessons together, Jesus was not only leading and preparing those for his day, for his resurrection. He told them, destroy this temple and I'll raise it up in 3 days. Now they misunderstood. They thought he was talking about the building, but he was talking about the building, this body. This is the temple of God, your body and mine. We all are. He said, if you destroy it, I'll raise it up in 3 days, talking about himself. So he was and he still is. He's leading and preparing his people for every generation for the day when everybody in the grave is going to hear his voice and everybody forth is going to come forth either under the resurrection of life or to the resurrection of damnation. I remember in college when I started to realize I'm sitting in, of all places, a history class in college. We're studying Ponce de Leon, looking for the fountain of youth and all that and want to live forever. And I remember I'm sitting there thinking, well, that's kind of dumb. You're going to live forever anyway. You shouldn't be worried about living forever. You should be worried about where you're going to spend forever. That's the key. To me, the devil uses that as a trick. He's got you worried about living forever here. I don't want to live forever here. If you want to live forever here, I got bad news for you. You're not going to have a good time in eternity. All right, so realize Christ is preparing us through these miracles, preparing them and preparing us to see the reality of the resurrection. It's coming. So I want to read one passage before we look at the actual lesson. It's in John chapter 5, verse 24. It says this, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that heareth my word and believeth on him that sent me hath everlasting life, and shall not come into condemnation, but is passed from death unto life. Verily, verily, I say unto you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead shall hear the voice of the Son of God, and they that hear shall live. For as the Father hath life in himself, so hath given to the Son to have life in himself. And he hath given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the Son of Man. Marvel not at this, for the hour is coming, in that which all that are in the grave shall hear his voice, and shall come forth, and they that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation." So as we study this story today, this first, I guess, stage, if you will, of these resurrections, there are a couple of things we want to look at to help us experience the resurrection life on that glorious day. And it's basically the 3 points of our lesson. We're going to look at the appeal of Jairus, the response of Jesus to that appeal, and then the resurrection of Jairus' daughter as our final point. So if you're in Mark chapter 5, again, it also is in Matthew 9 and in Luke 8, but we're going to read it from Mark. Mark chapter 5, verse 21. Actually, there's two miracles in the middle of this. One of them we've already studied, but they go together. So here it is, verse 21. "And when Jesus was passed over again by ship unto the other side, much people gathered unto him, and he was nigh unto the sea. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. And a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind, and touched his garment. For she said, If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus immediately, knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press, and said, Who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me? And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing that was done unto her, came and fell down before him, and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague. While he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. And he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he saith unto them, Why make ye this ado and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, he taketh the father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with him, and entered in where the damsel was lying. And he took the damsel by the hand, and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is interpreted, Damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years. And they were astonished with a great astonishment. And he charged them straitly that no man should know it, and commanded that something should be given her to eat. So I want to get a clear understanding of the setting that Mark's presenting to us. Just prior to the setting of the miracle, where we started reading, Jesus had shown forth his power and authority in mighty ways. He'd calmed a storm. He delivered a man from unclean spirits that tormented him. He had sent evil spirits into a herd of swine at their request, and the herd ran over the cliff. They fell in the sea and died. The people came to see what happened. They saw legions setting, clothed in his right mind. they were probably afraid of what else the presence of Christ could cost them, so they asked Christ to leave. This tragic mistake of excluding Jesus from present and future plans has been repeated over and over again quite a bit. Some of us have probably done that same thing on occasion. So it's dangerous to ask Jesus to leave in any kind of situation. In response to that, Jesus got in a ship, went to the other side of the sea. That brought us to where our text started today. We studied all those other miracles too, but keep in mind those miracles are pretty fresh in the mind of the disciples. They've seen it. They're being impacted by that. That leads to crossing the sea and coming to where he was in this particular text. It's interesting to me as we study these miracles, they all kind of bring one to the next. It's like stages of thought. I look at it kind of this way. If God would have told me when I was 9 what I was going to be doing today, I'd have never believed it. It'd have been crazy. But I can see several things that happened since I was 9 that prepared me for where I am right now. So these miracles, we've studied all the miracles over nature and all that stuff. We've studied miracles of healing and all that. I don't think we should look at them as isolated incidences. We should look at them as connecting things together as we go. So Christ doesn't give you the whole thing up front. That's the part where faith comes in. He gives you what you need to know to do what he's asking you to do. We try to know more than what we need to know so that we'll be secure enough in ourselves to do what he's called us to do. And we miss the whole point. You don't need to be insecure in you at all. You need to be secure in Christ. So he gives you little incremental things. So the disciples saw these miracles as they went along. That prepared them for a day when he was going to be hanging on a cross. They didn't see that coming because they really, this is me, they really thought he was establishing his kingdom here on the earth right then. They were following him to conquer everybody. But these miracles lead you through that. So keep in mind as we look at this again, these last 3 miracles in this quarter we look at are pointing us to the resurrection to help us to believe that that's a real event and it's going to happen. So first thing we want to look at is the appeal of Jairus. As Jesus arrived on the other side of the sea, just after Legion and all that, we just talked about that, a crowd gathered. Evidently, he was standing by the sea speaking to the crowd like he had done a bunch of other times in the past. So Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, came up to him, fell down at his feet. Matthew's account says that Jairus worshiped him. So it's believed that he made his way through the crowd, and as he approached Jesus, he knelt down, bending his head towards him possibly until his forehead touched the ground. Humility was on display. Now realize he's a ruler of the synagogue. Those are the guys that don't like him. He's bowing down before him. So it's extremely significant because of his position. A certain ruler named Jairus. So men in this position of authority didn't normally believe that Jesus was the Christ. Many of them had made up their minds to do everything they could to make sure Christ was killed. So by virtue of his position, he would have had strong prejudices against our Lord and those who are associated with him and been hostile toward Jesus. In the natural, he would have been. Probably prior to his daughter getting sick, he was hostile toward Jesus. Yet he dared to humble himself and fall at Christ's feet. Imagine for a moment his position concerning this situation. His only daughter, sitting beside her, holding her hand, looking into her eyes. She's getting worse and worse. He's tried everything he can. And look, he's important, so he can do a lot. There's a lot he could have done. But none of it works. None of it was to any avail. Think about this. He was familiar with this about Christ and knew what people were saying about him. He finally arrived at the point that he didn't care what everybody else thought. He had to find Jesus. He had to fall down at his feet. He had to ask Christ to help. It's a shame we wait until we get so far down that we can't, we can only look up before we turn to him. You can turn to him before anything happens instead of waiting until after it does, but I guess that's another story. It is a great day, though, when a person reaches a point where they're going to fall at the feet of the Lord in spite of what everybody else says. This public request, keep in mind, the disciples know who this guy is. They had to know who he was. The people there know who this guy is. All right, a public request made with intense earnest by one holding such a position was an incredible statement. It clearly showed that Jesus touches every part of society, from the poorest to the richest, from the most influential to the least, and also that every individual has their opportunity to make their own decision about Christ. This is where I think the setting matters. The religious leader, who pretty much is in charge of everything, is meeting Christ at the same time that a poor woman who's got a medical issue that she can't do anything about and nobody's going to help her anyway, she spent everything she has, also encounters Christ, both at the same time. So according to Luke's account, Jairus only had one daughter, and that he came to Jesus prayerfully asking for his help in what appears to be almost broken sentences here. Again, it reveals the burden he was under. This ruler of the synagogue asked Christ if he would come to his house and lay hands on her that she might be healed and live. Again, he tries in the text of the other two accounts to convey the fact she's extremely ill. In Mark, he said, "My little daughter lieth at the point of death." Matthew says, "My daughter is even now dead." So obviously she's so sick when he left that more than likely he did not expect to see her alive when he returned. And Luke writes, he said she lay dying. So it's a great day when we come to Christ for our need, no matter what it is, in spite of our position. I submit that you can only come to Christ in spite of your position. If you come to Christ because you think you matter, you've already missed it. You matter to the Lord, you do, but your position does not. He doesn't care if you're a king. He doesn't care if you're a beggar on the street. He loves everybody. Don't misconstrue that. So we can learn from this certain ruler not to allow the seriousness to bring us to this point, but rather make a determined effort to go to Christ with everything regardless of your position, before something happens. He makes things better, and he always responds to genuine faith, albeit the ruler or the poor woman who doesn't have anything. Second point we want to look at is the response of Jesus. Mark says, Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. Matthew said, Jesus arose and followed him. Surely the anticipation of Jairus was beginning to rise in Jesus as Jesus agreed and came with him. The one that had healed so many and done so many wonderful works was now following Jairus to his house to heal his little girl. So his hope is inspired. He begins to make his way home. And then his hopes are dampened again because there's a delay. Anybody else besides me ever have that? You're praying, and Christ answers and says, yes, I'm going to do this. And then as soon as you start heading that direction, the whole world caves in on top of you. And you're like, I thought you said you were going to fix this. Why now? We're not looking at the big picture. He can deal with that woman and with his daughter all in the same time if he wants to. He's not bound by none of that. Here the delay happens. The woman with the issue of blood comes on the scene, pressing through the crowd to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. In response to her touch, Jesus, he stopped. He turned because he realized virtue had gone out of him. What a glorious miracle for the woman. What a great disappointment if you're Jairus. Put yourself in his shoes. I've bowed down. I have sacrificed a lot because I am a Sadducee. I am important, and I bowed down to this man. He said he's going to come with you. I'm fired up. Let's go. And this woman gets in my way. Finally, he reached Jesus, finally humbling himself in spite of his position. He gets him to come heal his daughter. They're headed in the right direction, and Jesus stops. According to Luke, he said, somebody touched me, for I perceive that virtue has gone out of me. That's probably not something Jairus was excited to hear. Think about this in your head for a minute, and think of, what do you think was going through Jairus' mind? If you're Jairus, what's going through your mind? Panic? Frustration? In our world today, frustration would probably be the key one, because people get upset when they end the line at McDonald's and it takes 5 minutes instead of 30 seconds. You know, animosity. Maybe he was again like, woman, get out of the way. I see all that a possibility, But now think about this. What are some things that should have been going through his mind? Trusting Jesus, being thankful that the woman was healed. How many of y'all have seen somebody receive a miracle for the Lord and you didn't get excited for them? I can't be the only one that does happen to, but you should. Because Christ he's not working for you. He's working for everyone. If he does a miracle for somebody else that seems to be in the way of what he's telling you, then he's still right. He still knows what he's doing. Rejoice with the people receiving the miracle and realize your miracle's coming. What happens if you get too bent out of shape? You might not be getting your miracle. You got to realize it's about the relationship with Christ and the condition of your heart. Don't let the circumstances get in the way and get you confused where you think Christ forgot about you. He didn't forget about you. He ain't forgot nothing. There's the right time for everything. This guy, Jairus, I don't know. He was probably thinking, man, look, there's a ton of people touching you. This crowd is pressing up against you. You're letting your virtue flow out to this lady, but my daughter's fixing to die. Hurry up. Come on, let's go. Let's get there before it's too late. Y'all do know it's never too late for Christ. We think it's late. He's on time all the time. In the midst of the entire scene, someone came from Jairus' house and said, look, she died. You don't even bother him anymore. Now, that's a lousy attitude too. You see how quick the world's going to be. Oh yeah, you prayed to Christ and look what happened, and now it's getting worse. It didn't get better. Well, sometimes people in the hospital get worse before they get better. Don't jump on all that garbage. Stick with what God told you. I'm going to heal your son. I'm going to heal your daughter. I'm going to heal your friend. I'm going to do this. I have a new job for you. Don't let the devil throw all this garbage on top of you and you lose focus on what Christ said. It's not about what's happening. It's about what God said is going to happen. Do you believe it or not? What a disappointment from Jairus' perspective and from ours if we're not looking the right way. And it should have been a disappointment except for one thing. Jesus heard the word that these people spoke about the daughter. He heard what they said. He knew what he was going to do. How many times in this life do we face what appears to be a disappointment except for Christ? They said she's dead, but God said, I'm going to your house and I'm going to heal your daughter. Again, look at these couple of verses. I'm going to read through them pretty quick. I may not read all of them I got, but look at these verses. Genesis 50:20. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good to bring to pass as it is this day, so much people alive. That's about Joseph. Psalm 49:15. But God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave, for he shall receive me. Selah. Proverbs 21:12. The righteous man wisely considereth the house of the wicked, but God overthroweth the wicked for their wickedness. Luke 12:20. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then who shall these things be which thou hast provided? In Acts 13:30. But God raised him from the dead. 1 Corinthians 1:27, but God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. Ephesians 2:4, but God, who is rich in mercy, for his great love wherewith he loved us. Philippians 2:27, for indeed he was sick and nigh unto death, but God had mercy on him, and not him only, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. We got to realize where we are. Except for Christ, this could be a disappointment. The devil will do anything in his power to use the circumstances to distract you from what God said. It doesn't matter what happened. It doesn't matter what happens. What matters is what God said. We worry too much about tons of stuff that doesn't matter. Anybody besides me ever worried for days on end about something and it never did even happen? I've lost sleep plenty of time. Oh, I can't go talk to the boss about that. He's not going to like that tomorrow. I can't even sleep because I got to go talk to the boss about that. I get in there and I tell the boss and he goes, oh yeah, that's good. Get out of here. That was it. The total sum of the whole thing was, yep, all right, go on, get back to work. and I'm thinking I'm going to get fired and the whole world's going to collapse on me. Don't let the devil do this to us. Our Lord overheard the message from Jairus' house. He overheard that devil talking in Jairus' ear, telling him a pack of lies. And Christ said, be not afraid, only believe. Well, every time the devil's jumping in your ear, guess what? Be not afraid and only believe. Luke's account says, fear not, believe only, and she shall be made whole. So as far as Jairus was concerned, there was no greater words that could have been said. No greater lips than these words, than what Jesus had spoken. Surely they revived hope and encouraged his heart and strengthened his faith. Guess what? They do the same for us today if you'll listen to them. Be not afraid, only believe. That'll bring us to the third point we want to look at in the lesson, is the resurrection of Jairus' daughter. Think about this. After these encouraging words, after he said this to Jairus, keep the whole context in here now. The disciples have seen him heal legion. They've seen him cast the devils out. They saw the people throw him out. They saw all of this. They saw him come across the sea. They saw him talking to the people again. They saw Jairus' entourage came and tell him, I need you to help my daughter. They saw Jesus agree and going that way. They saw the woman come up and touch him. They saw him heal the woman. They saw all of this. And they heard Jesus tell Jairus, be not afraid, only believe. I don't know about you, but I'm thinking if I'm Peter, James, or John, I'm like, whoa, what's he fixing to do? I'm starting to get fired up about this. Think about, I've just seen all this, so I know he can do stuff, and he's saying, don't be afraid, only believe. I think they already are believing for whatever I don't even think they know what he's going to do, but they know he can do it. The girl, she's 12 years old. They say she's dead. And look, she's not in a trance. She was undoubtedly dead. But death had only been there for a short time before putting its stamp on her countenance in this case. That's why I think it's important we see these things as progressive. He's going to heal this girl. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to say she wasn't dead. She was just sleeping. Y'all had it wrong. She passed out. They didn't know she was alive, and Christ went in, he shook her real good, and she woke up. There'll be a lot of people say that. Guess what? Christ has got another miracle right after this one where they're dead. They've been prepared for death. They're buried. They in the coffin. And guess what? He's going to resurrect that guy too. And there's still going to be some who say blah, blah, blah. Back in those days, they used to put that bell on the grave with a little string in it, because if you died, sometimes people did die. They buried him alive. You could pull the string and everybody would know to come dig you up. You weren't really dead. There are going to be people to say that's what happened to him. So then he's going to come to Lazarus, and Lazarus has been in the grave a long time, and everybody there is like, don't open that cave. That's man, he stinks. He's dead. And he's going to resurrect him. And then there's a day long, my grandpa's going to come up out that grave one day. You're going to come up, if you don't go into rapture, you're going to come up out that grave one day too. Don't lose sight here. Even though there are going to be some scoffers after the fact, she was dead. She wasn't just fainted. So when Jesus arrived at the house, he found his whole house in an uproar. Evidently, the Jairus' family and all them had already hired the professional mourners, and there were already those who were present who were weeping and playing music and all that kind of stuff. Y'all know what I'm talking about. There's always people. Sometimes there's people at a funeral that barely even knew the person was dead, and they whining and crying the most. Y'all know it happens. Jesus wasn't pleased with what was going on. The setting's not good here. Remember, it's Jairus' daughter. He's important. So I want to be important too. So I've got to make a big deal about Jairus' daughter and console Jairus. So, I'm trying to get... People try to abuse the situation to their advantage. We can learn here something very important. Don't ask Jesus to perform a miracle for healing and a miracle to keep someone from dying while at the same time making their funeral arrangements. You can't do both. They're contradictory. They're inconsistent with each other. I would submit Christ doesn't approve of any of that kind of foolishness. If you're going to talk to Christ about helping your loved one who's been in their coma for however many years it is, don't start planning their funeral at the same time. If you believe that he's going to raise him from the dead, and if he tells you he is, then stick with that. Again, this is another trick the devil uses in your mind. He'll say, well, just in case, plan on this. Look, if God told you this is what's going to happen, you don't need a just in case. You don't need a backup plan. You just need to go about doing what God told you to do, because that's what's going to happen. I don't think most, even good Christians today, fully understand the impact of that. If God said it, that's what it is. No backup plan is necessary. He doesn't need no help. If he wants to raise somebody from the dead, he don't need the doctor to come look at him. He don't need none of that. Don't plan the funeral for your loved one that you're praying for to be healed. Again, let's remain in a position of genuine faith so that Jesus can do not only what needs to be done, but that he can do it however he wants to do it. Don't preconceive this is how it works. That's not how it works. It works like this. God said it, it happens. That's it. There's no formula, there's no plan like that at all. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk to the Lord, we shouldn't ask the Lord, we shouldn't inquire about why things are going. I'm not saying that. But your faith needs to be in what he said. So it's those who are not sincerely involved in a need that can laugh at the words that Jesus speaks. What did it say about the crowd? They laughed him to scorn. How many of y'all think Jairus was laughing at him? Anybody thinks the disciples were laughing at him? Who's laughing at him? The people who aren't vested in that need. We've got to get to the point where we're as vested in everyone else's need as we are in our own. Look, I've heard preachers say it before too. When your friend's kid's sick, pray for that kid like it's your kid. All right? Guess what? When your enemy's friend's sick, pray for that kid just like you do your own kid. We got to be vested in what's the need is, or you're going to be laughing Christ right out the door just like they were doing. It says they laughed him to scorn. So the professionals weren't longing for the miraculous. Don't expect to get encouragement from a funeral director any more than you expect to find a complete cure from a psychiatrist. Think about it. If you're paying some guy $700, $800, $900 an hour to treat you, you think he's interested in you getting any better? What happens if you get better? You quit coming to see him. Again, in both cases, funeral directors and psychiatrists, they would be out of business if they knew how to solve the problem. Wouldn't need a funeral director if everybody knew how to stop death. God can do anything. I know last time we studied these miracles, I thought it was interesting, instead of saying God can do anything, maybe we need to think God can do everything. Do you believe it? Raising the dead is no difficult than healing the sick, calming the storm, or feeding the thousands. They saw all that. Raising a dead person is no harder for him than arousing someone from sleep. Get the unbelief out and see what God can do. It says in the text, all that laughing him to scorn, that Jesus put them out. Get out of here. He put all that away. The only people he left were the disciples, and then only 3 of them, and her parents. Here's something we can learn too. Make sure you're in the group that is present when Jesus is working. The rest of the people weren't allowed to be present when he was working. Why? Because they're laughing. They don't believe. They're not interested in what's going on. They're not vested in what's going to happen. Excuse me. So unbelief caused many people in this setting to miss a marvelous work of the Lord. Yes, they heard about it. Yes, they know it happened, but they didn't get to see it. That's way different. Look, like I said before, I've never seen anybody raised from the dead. Buddy, it would change my view a lot if I actually saw it. I've heard about it. I believe it. I'm not saying I don't believe it. But what a different impact it would be if you actually were there. And most people weren't there. Because of what? Unbelief. You know how much we miss because of unbelief? I think we're all going to be surprised when we get to that last day and we stand at the throne the judgment seat of Christ or the white throne of judgment, either one, we're going to be surprised at what we did and what we did not do. Again, a lot of people miss the things of the Lord today because of their unbelief. Scripturally, it's a sin, and at times it limits the work of the Lord among those who do believe. It says, he took her by the hand and said unto her, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. So he restored her life with his word. I know it's cliche, you hear it all life, there's life in the word. Guess what? There's life in the word. We hear that so much that we sometimes, that's a quaint little cliche thing, but it's true. And you got the best example of it right here. He spoke a word and she sat up. Notice I didn't say she woke up. She sat up. She was no longer dead. That same word began in the beginning. In the beginning, God said, and this happened. God said, get up, and she got up. So the restoration was immediate. The restoration was complete. Jesus laid hold of this cold little dead child's hand, spoke glorious words of life, and in a moment she sat up alive. Again, we see that man's extremity is God's opportunity. She arose and she walked. So her motion served as evidence of the strength, and the strength as evidence of her life. She didn't just open her eyes and lay in a bed for 3 months. She opened her eyes and she sat up, and he said, go get her something to eat. She was alive. And Jesus instructed them to feed her. He also charged them to tell no one. I read that a lot, and a lot of these times Christ says, don't tell anybody. I still ain't got all that figured out why he says don't tell anybody. I'm not 100% sure about all that, but I do think it's unique. Part of me thinks part of the reason for that is mankind in general wants to over-exaggerate everything to the point that you're almost telling lies about what happened to make it look better than what it did. It's best just to let her get up and walk outside. People are going to see her. They're going to know she was dead. Why back? She's not now. Look, Lazarus comes out that tomb. Everybody in the community knew what was going on there. You don't really need necessarily to add your 2 cents worth. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that's exactly how it works or not, but in my mind, that's the way I'm thinking. I can't, because I promise you that fish that got away is way bigger than it actually was. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So in conclusion, without question, this miracle clearly reveals that men see things differently than Christ. Men see a dead little girl. Christ sees an opportunity to witness about his power and authority over death. Men see the outside circumstances and deal with facts rather than principle. They see the circumference and don't see the center. Y'all know what I'm talking about here. I know my kids one time, they gave me this little jawbreaker thing as candy. And they were talking about how great this candy was, and you're going to love it. Look, I put that thing in my mouth. It was the sourest, most nasty stuff I've ever tasted. And I'm just about to spit it out, and I got all the outside off, and on the inside, that was some good candy. But if I'd have spit it out when I got that taste to the outside, I never would have got to the inside. Well, a lot of times that devil can change the outside appearance of stuff a little bit, and we don't hold on long enough to get to the inside. We don't hold on long enough to get to the miracle because we've let the devil distract us. So instead of seeing this girl be raised by Christ, we outside pouting and griping because he kicked us out because of unbelief. Jesus calls men beyond the facts and into the sanctuary of God's secret place, into the place where he's working. God calls us beyond what we see if we'll listen to what he said. Here at times, God grants an assurance of the things that he will do in the future. His instructions to Jairus and his instructions to the ones that were in the room before they raised her, what were they? 2 words, only believe. That's it. That's the instructions. We often put a period where he puts a comma. We say the end where Christ says the beginning. We want to tell everyone, and he instructs us that no one should be told. It's for sure that if we want to experience the resurrection life, we must learn to do exactly what he tells us to do and work to see things in the way that he does. Know this, whatever you're facing, and look, I know some of y'all face stuff worse than me. I consider myself, I hadn't really had a lot of trauma and terrible things. I've had some things not so good, but even my not so good things, even if they were terrible things, God's still in charge, whatever it is, from the biggest to the smallest. I see it like this. Some of my friends are like this. Their daughter or son gets in a car accident. They pray to the Lord like crazy about their son or daughter in a car accident. Yet hardly none of them pray about their son or daughter getting in the car driving somewhere. We pray about heal me from this and that and the other thing, but we don't pray before we do things that get us in a position to get injured and need God. Start with prayer. Don't end with prayer. Whatever we're facing, he's ready, he can respond, he's willing. More importantly, he can do it. You can put whatever you want in the blank. Whatever you're worried about, put in the blank. He can do that. Whatever it is, your that may be different than mine, but he can do them all. Biggest to smallest to whatever. All right, thank you all very much. Next week, we're going to look at another resurrection. It's the son, the widow in Nain being raised from the dead. Again, we're going to see this one. He's in the coffin. So thank you all very much.